Alrighty everybody, and welcome back to my War Thunder Tips and Tricks series. Today we're going to be talking about cover, and really how to use it, why we use it, and basically, cover. So the reason we're going to be doing this is because last video I talked about using cover when we're trying to spot and staying still, but I didn't really tell you what cover is. So I kind of want to talk about today and the different types of cover, when to use them, when not to use them, the pros and cons of them. So I guess the best way to start out is, why do we even use cover in the first place? And the answer is pretty simple. It's just for safety. Um, Cover can provide safety by making you harder to spot. It'll make it so that the enemies can't even see you at times, and it can make it so that you can't get hit depending on what type of cover you're using. Another main use of it is it eliminates avenues of attack. If we look here, we are situated so that we have the buildings off to our right, and we have allies behind us, and if we look, the only ways that the enemies can come in, assuming their allies are competent, is from the front and to our left. This means that the entire right hand and, as long as our allies are still alive, the rear are eliminated because the enemies can't both see you but also not shoot at you. So this means that you only have to deal with stuff that's in front of you and to the left of you, which is really, that's really helpful because well, it makes it easier on you. You don't have to deal with so much stuff, and yeah, it's just good to try and eliminate as much of the avenues of attack that the enemy can have. Eliminating both the left and the right would be ideal. That way, the only place that they can come from is in front of you. But that also limits the amount of enemies that you're gonna see. So, there's a catch-22 with how much do you eliminate? Do you eliminate everything but one little area, or do you eliminate, like here, most of it? I mean, this is still manageable. Whereas if I was just sitting in an open field, they can literally shoot me from anywhere. Another use of cover is to be able to see them before they see you. If you utilize what I taught you in the spotting video, you should be able to see over lots of different types of cover, especially things like rocks, rocks and certain fences and bushes and whatnot. Using these to see them before they see you means that you can get that essential first shot, which usually decides an engagement, whoever gets the first penetrating shot. Another thing that they can be used to is to obscure your movements when you're flanking, or even when you're trying to do a little bit of knife fight, CQB type stuff, because the cover will basically make it so that they can't see you, and if you're using cover effectively, you can surprise people and come out where they never really expected you to be. So that's kind of why we use cover. Let's get into what is cover and what's really not. Alright, so next up we have the different types of cover. There are two main types. There is solid cover, and there's, well, I don't really know what to call it, the not so solid cover, basically like shrubbery or bushes and whatnot. And the main difference is that solid cover will have a hitbox. That means that when you shoot shells at it, it will detect that the shell hit it. And the not so solid stuff doesn't have a hitbox. Shells will pass right through it, no problem. Obviously, the solid cover is going to be better at defending you. The non so solid cover won't. So let's get into looking at solid cover, which is, in my opinion, the much more important of the ones, and we'll talk about later. It's not, the other type of cover is not really useful in arcade battles, so I don't really want to make you guys wait for that. So, solid cover. There are two main types of solid cover. There is breakable or destructible, and unbreakable, or the solid type. Breakable is stuff like fences, posts, trees, etc. It can be broken, knocked down, destroyed, and it won't come back. Unbreakable is stuff like rocks, buildings, hills, terrain features, things that when you shoot them, they won't break. You can't really shoot through them. You can't shoot through a rock, at least not in this game. So there are certain, I should say, there are certain types of unbreakable things that will quote unquote break, but won't actually change gameplay. Things like the buildings in Advance on the Rhine, these will fall down, but they won't actually do anything to the gameplay. They just kind of look pretty. They leave a pile of rubble, a little bit of debris, but that's literally it. There's no change in whether or not this is a different type of cover. So there is solid cover like that. But solid cover is really the cover you should be looking for, and especially the solid cover that doesn't break. Because there are a lot of pros that are, it has the best pro to con ratio. Some of the pros of this solid, really solid type of cover is that it can't be shot through. This means that no matter what type of shell you're firing, or the enemy's firing, they can't hit you. On top of that, usually these are pretty large. You can hide stuff like the mouse. You can hide stuff that is really, that shouldn't be hidden normally. And you can surprise a lot of enemies doing this. In most cases, you can see over this stuff, the exception being like buildings, some higher hills or mountains. But for the most part, things like rocks and things that are like the shorter hills, these can be seen over and you can't be seen very easily. Um, some other places is that it's very common. Just about every single map has rocks. Just about every single map that doesn't have rocks has a really urban landscape. These can be found everywhere. Obviously, they won't be in the middle of a field, but as long as you stay kind of nearby these things, the terrain will lead you to the main areas that the battle will take place. Um, they're usually specifically put into the map so that they can be utilized by you, the player. Uh, so really, that's a lot of good pros. I mean, you can't be shot. You can kind of usually see over them or look around them. That's good stuff. So the cons are that you have to maneuver around them to engage the people because you can't shoot through them. This leads to a lot of peekaboo type battling, and I'll talk about that in a later video. Um, but it also means that, well, they're not in every single situation. Like I said, when you're in an open field, sometimes they just won't be there. You kind of have to plan ahead when you're using this type of cover because it's not super readily available in every single map. So that's the talk about unbreakable solid cover. Now let's talk about the breakable solid cover. Now, like I said earlier, the main difference is that the breakable, when you shoot it, it will be destroyed. Some types of breakable cover are better than others. Some of the solid walls that you'll find are a lot better than the semi-see-through fences. These solid walls are usually a little bit taller and can mask a tank better than the fences. But the main pros to these is that when you shoot at them and you're using a thin fused munition, what I mean by that is if you look at the stat card, the munitions fuse is like less than a millimeter or something like that. These munitions will be destroyed upon, well, hitting these types of structures. So if you're firing an HE shell, a HESH shell, a heat shell, a lot of these triggered explosions, they will detonate as soon as they hit this destructible environment, and they'll be useless against your tank, which means that you get an extra life basically. Whereas if they would have hit you, now they're going to hit the destructible object instead, which is, I mean, it's basically giving you a chance to shoot them back. They also can obstruct your view. Sometimes it's really hard to see people over these because you have to get so close. And they're pretty common in cities. Usually you'll find these in everywhere from Eastern Europe to, they're all over the maps. And you can shoot through them. And that's a double-edged sword. If you're using a solid shot AP shell, or anything that has less than a couple millimeters of fuse, you can shoot through these no problem, which means that you can surprise enemies by shooting through them, and they might not expect it. That being said, it's also a con. They can be shot through a solid shot. That's not necessarily good because a lot of low tiers utilize solid shot, and even at the high tiers, stuff like APDS can go right through it. And oftentimes these aren't big enough to hide things like the mouse. They'll Your standard medium tank, some heavy tanks, you'll be fine, but some of the bigger tanks might be too tall, or they might have things that stick out above it. On top of that, they're just like the other solid types of cover. They are really sparse in fields, and well, compared to the other types of cover, they're usually the rarest. They're not they're not everywhere. Yeah, they're kind of situational as to where they will be. So that's most of solid cover. So let's now talk about the not so solid cover. This is gonna be your shrubberies, stuff like that. Um, and these are not the best type of cover to use. Like I kind of mentioned earlier, they're not very useful in arcade battles. In fact, they're completely useless. Because on your HUD you will have enemies appear, and because they don't have any kind of hitbox, you can shoot right through these. You'll be able to see everything perfectly fine. Um, there will be no problem shooting enemies like this. So really, this stuff is useless in arcade battles. In realistic simulator, obviously you can use it because it won't appear on the screen immediately as far as the HUD. So really the next biggest problem is going to be draw distance. Draw distance is how well your computer can render or draw in certain objects. And on weaker computers, well, the draw distance is pretty short. And even on computers that run the absolute max settings, even after a few hundred meters, the amount of shrubs and bushes start to decrease, and especially decrease in like texture size. They start to look less ugly, and tanks become a lot more visible. What this means is that at a distance, you might see that or think that you're in a lot of cover, but the enemy will see that you're not, and you might look like you're sitting in an open field with a dinky little bush next to you, whereas on your screen you're sitting in the middle of a jungle, and you have no idea why they're able to see you. This is usually because of draw distance. It's a big um, con to using this type of cover. The next con is that it doesn't have a collision mesh. Like I mentioned earlier, you can shoot through this with any type of round. This means that if you're spotted, everyone will be able to shoot you, and if you don't have any type of solid cover around, you're going to get shot at for a while, because, well, everything's going to go right through it. On top of that, this is usually not very big cover. You either need lots and lots of shrubs together, or you need lots of shrubs and lots of trees in like a forest to be able to cover up a decent sized tank. Things like the mouse will not be able to utilize this cover at all. Usually they're too tall. Some of the smaller tanks in the game, like the ASU-85, will be able to utilize this cover a lot more effectively because they're really short and they can hide in those bushes. On top of that, it's really obvious where the dense parts of the cover are. So when you're looking for tanks or the enemy is looking for you, this is the first place they're going to look because it's the only area on the map where there is dense cover. So going to these places and utilizing this dense cover is really, it's very predictable, and you don't want to be predictable. That gets you killed more often than not. That being said, there are pros to using this type of cover, and the main one is that's readily available. Just about every map that isn't in the desert will have lots and lots of cover. Even in snowy maps, usually they have a fair amount of this light cover. It's not overly common in snowy maps, but most maps are not snowy. Most maps happen in the summer or in autumn, spring, and they have lots and lots of good cover like this, and they will, um, it's readily available. On top of that, you can literally put it on a tank. Utilizing this in conjunction with the premium bushes, it's a good type of cover, and since Gaijin has increased the draw distance on this stuff that's on your tank, even at a long distance, relatively long distance, your tank might look like a big old bush with a bunch of smaller bushes around you, which will help to break up your silhouette, which is a really big help, and we'll talk about that in my How Not to Get Spotted video, which is basically going to be how to cover your silhouette and blend in a little bit better. So covering up your silhouette is a big way of stopping yourself from getting spotted. And this type of cover is really, really effective at that because, well, bushes are pretty random and they help to break up the outline of tanks very, very well. So I hope that this has helped you to learn a little bit about cover and what it can be used for, what is useful, what's not so useful. And if there's nothing else you learned today, remember the 5 Ds. Dodge, dip, duck, dive, dodge. No, don't actually remember those. Those probably won't help you at all. But make sure to like, comment, subscribe, guys, and I'll catch you later.